Now this one is a really fucked up story, Penny heard her friend say, and felt the first shiver of anticipation running through her body. That's why they had come here after all. Why they had spent 9 hours in a tiny car. She raised her gaze and could see the old house looking completely abandoned for decades, waiting in the slowly lengthening shadows of the buildings surrounding it. May I present to you? This was the home of Dr. Kaster. Penny clapped in appreciation and watched in delight as Ava moved like a tour guide, raising and lowering her hand as if to say, "Look at this grandiose piece of art." Dr. Kaster was a man well liked in his community. Well, he started off as a refugee, of course, coming here in the early 19th century with his family. The people back then didn't take kindly to those kinds of immigrants, especially ones from his home country. But they soon learned to appreciate and eventually love the Kasters. Again, Penny gave her a round of applause and felt Ava's grin get even wider. No one knows where they lived at first. Probably a tent somewhere close to the woods, or maybe a small hut they rented from some more wealthy person. You see, life back then was hard, especially for people fleeing the war. They weren't readily accepted, at least not according to what I could find out. It is said that young Nicholas Kaster played with the frogs under the bridges and took long hikes to hide his evil nature from the prying eyes of the townsfolk. What we do know for certain is that his father, called Nikolai Kaster, opened a small dentistry studio on the outskirts of the town. Apparently, he had learned his trade in his old country and now wanted to use his skills to earn his family a living, but also to ingratiate them to the people here. According to legends, he performed admirably, treating young and old, male and female, rich and poor alike. Penny smiled again and watched her friend twirl around, then face her once more. Old man Nikolai was so beloved that the townsfolk let him buy a house in the midst of town, which we now see here, behind us. His family lived upstairs, while the treatment room was in the basement. A strange setup, people back then remarked, since most would use their cellars to store vegetables. But not Nikolai Kaster. No. He was of the opinion that a calm environment like a basement was good for the patients. You see, there was no real anesthesia back then.
What about morphine?
Penny cut in, and it earned her a quick, mean glare before her friend continued. You see, there was no real anesthesia back then, since morphium and nitrous oxide would only be widely available a few decades later. Some patients came in drunk, while others tried to simply knuckle through the procedures. There were, of course, rumors that rich folks used all kinds of different drugs and pills to keep the pain at bay. What was definitely true is that the dentist had to have quick yet skillful hands, so as to not lose a finger during the procedures. Penny could see her friend's wicked smile and applauded again. These personal tours were great. They got drunk or stoned, traveled around, and she let Ava take the lead, while showing enough appreciation to keep her friend entertained as well. Whatever the case, Doctor Kaster was well beloved by people far and wide, and his son, young Doctor Kaster, was seen as his logical successor. The child indeed was pretty much a prodigy, according to some reports. At 8, he started helping his father, at first with smaller stuff, like appointments and a collection of bills. But soon, he would stand right by his dad's side as he worked on people's teeth. There are old newspapers where they interviewed him, and according to him, he was only 13 years old when he pulled his first tooth. Penny chimed in, not liking the mental image of a young teenager ripping out a tooth with pliers. And without anesthetic. But her friend didn't give her any time to think about it too much. According to that same interview, Nicholas admitted that the sight of blood only made him queasy until he was about 10. After that point, he found it oddly calming, which now that we know what would happen later isn't the whole truth, I think. I'm guessing, and that's just my personal opinion, that the good doctor loved the sight of blood. Maybe even a bit too much. I wouldn't be surprised if I learned the guy got some kind of perverted satisfaction out of watching people bleed. Penny smiled again as she made a mental note to get her friend a Bloody Mary once they were done here. But that part comes a little bit later. Let's finish with the father first. Old man Nikolai, as I said, was beloved by the people around here. He was well known as a very proficient dentist, and I couldn't find a single source saying anything bad about him. For 2 decades, he served his community, before one day he slipped down some stairs and broke his neck. The good doctor had been taken out by a simple stroke of bad luck, and people around town were absolutely bereaved. According to the newspaper, the funeral was pretty much a town-wide event, and even people from other places around the area came to pay their respects. His son read out a eulogy, which marked the first time a lot of the townsfolk caught a glimpse of him in a public setting. As I said before, there had been rumors about that child pretty much from the day the Kasters had arrived here. People back then took care not to openly speak of what they really felt about others. But you can get their sentiments clearly from the short comments after the funerals. Some praised him for becoming an upstanding citizen. Others hoped he would do well following in his father's footsteps, while a whole bunch seemed put off by his morbid appearance. Penny could see her friend sporting that wicked smile again. There was more to this story, and she enjoyed every second of it. I dug up other old records from this town and noticed something strange. Almost every newspaper article about the Kasters as a family tried to steer clear of young Nicholas long before what happened. If he got mentioned at all, it was either as his father's assistant, hardly saying anything else about him, or they described him as something akin to the black sheep of the family. While the Kasters were beloved in the town, people seemed to be put off by Nicholas in particular. All those articles about the young prodigy couldn't hide the almost disdain many felt for him. I'm pretty sure if we could talk to the people who grew up with him, they would call him creepy or off-putting or something like that. And then, after his father's funeral, he was poised to take over the business. Tell me, how much would I have to pay you to visit him as a dentist? Penny almost recoiled as she looked at her friend.
I'm not a fan of dentists in modern times. There's no way I would ever visit one back then.
She could see her friend laughing and smiling, and suddenly getting serious again. Well, when Nicholas took over after his father's funeral, it seemed many people thought the same way about him. Hardly anyone in town dared to go to him, and the family's financial situation took a downward turn. It didn't matter much that the people who did go came out speaking highly of him. Some even compared him favorably to his father. But there was one marked difference. A smile. Apparently, Nicholas was in the habit of grinning throughout the procedures. And that freaked people out.
Of fucking course it did.
Penny cut in, ignoring her friend's glare.
Who wouldn't be freaked out by something like that? I don't want to even imagine looking up at my dentist and see him grinning while he's pulling a tooth. Who the fuck does that?
Now, it was her friend's turn to chuckle. Oh, Penny, I think you'd find quite a few strange expressions behind the masks of dentists. Even today, she said with a wink. But yeah, I don't think grinning from ear to ear during those procedures would make people like you. Well, with the townsfolk avoiding him and only a small percentage of people returning for a second appointment, what do you think Nicholas could have done to change his fortunes? Penny looked at her friend while she pondered that question. Well, it wasn't like he could have put out ads in the 19th century, right? Maybe he could have paid someone to walk around the area and drum up some new customers. People who didn't know him. In the end, she shrugged and looked at her friend who was now grinning as widely as the doctor had. You see, during old man Nikolai's tenure as a dentist, the world had started to change. There were new discoveries made every year, but the father didn't really want to use them. According to Nicholas, his dad was very set in his ways, and that was one of the main points of contention in their relationship. With only a handful of people still coming by for appointments, he found the time to travel a bit. And so, he found the one thing he seemed to love even more than a sight of blood. Ether. Penny was taken aback. She had heard about that stuff, of course, but had never thought it would have been available somewhere in the early to mid-19th century. Doctor Kaster was, in fact, an outlier. There was a big demonstration with ether in 1840-something, but our doctor here used it even earlier. He got the idea from some students who, at the time, practiced something called ether frolics. It was hardly more than a bunch of bored rich kids who put ether on rags and towels and inhaled it until they got euphoric.
Jesus Christ.
Penny cut in again.
People really don't change, do they?
No, they absolutely do not. He came into contact with someone on his travels and apparently joined in on the fun. As far as I can tell, it went like this. The first time Doctor Kaster participated, he got high and realized afterward that he couldn't really remember much about what had happened, which gave him an idea. They inhaled again the next night, but that time he didn't join in directly. Instead, he stood by until the students were almost completely out of it, then tested out his new theory. One of the guys had an abscess in his mouth, and the doctor waited until he was good and docile before taking out his instruments and starting his work.
What the fuck, Eva?
Penny asked, as she felt her stomach cramping up.
Did he even have permission, or did he do it right then and there?
She heard her friend laughing again. Sometimes Ava rebelled in those morbid facets of the stories she told a little bit too much. No permission, no sterile room or anything. I think he just wanted to see if the patient would fight him or not. Maybe he enjoyed seeing them lying there, completely at his mercy. Well, whatever's the case, he managed to talk his way out of it after the guys had woken up, calling it a study and an experiment. According to him, his unwilling participant was actually glad he had done so, since the abscess had been bothering him for weeks. I don't know if I believe that, since there's neither a name nor a record for the poor guy. And I'm pretty sure Dr. Kaster would be comfortable with threatening the students into compliance. What we can say for sure is that he found a supplier for ether there. And when he returned to his home, his whole business changed. And he could feel it in the air. Her friend was getting to the good parts of that story. Her excitement was contagious. Nicholas actually kept a record of all his treatments, which is why we know so much about him and his proclivities. The first time he used ether during a procedure, the local barkeeper had come in. It took the doctor almost half an hour to convince him to let him use it. But in the end, the man agreed. Nicholas wrote the following down about it. Impacted tooth extracted without problems. Normal amount of blood. Patient was calm and compliant. And apparently, the barkeeper himself was ecstatic as well. He told people around town, and it even made it into the newspaper, although far away from the front page. Slowly, the business started to pick up again, and Nicholas even managed to outperform his father during those times. The only thing he didn't seem to have was his dad's friendly disposition. Now that the people were anesthetized, they couldn't even see him grinning from ear to ear. But that didn't stop the rumors. Some of his patients complained about the after effects of the ether, which apparently made Nicholas fly into rages. He could be heard throughout the area screaming at some poor child who felt sick after a session. A housewife who complained about almost choking when she came to got banned from his business entirely. Once he kicked someone out before even treating him for refusing ether for a simple procedure.
So he really wasn't a good guy, you say?
Penny asked, with a heavy dose of sarcasm. Well, he was a proficient dentist. That much can't be denied. But he also seemed to be a raging asshole if things didn't go his way. I think he liked working on people, but not the people themselves, if that makes sense. Penny nodded. Yeah, she knew quite a few people like that as well. Pretty much anyone who had ever worked in retail would probably agree too. But there was more to that story. She knew it. Ava was smiling far too brightly to let it end like this. Well, in a kinda strange coincidence, the opinion of the townsfolk pretty much mirrored his. They all liked his dentistry business, since he worked quickly, skillfully, and now even painlessly. Although most of them pretty much despised Nicholas himself. He wasn't a welcome guest. Let's put it like that. But they gladly paid him for his services. And this is the part where the story turns a bit darker. Nicholas' mom died 2 years after he had started using ether, which left him completely alone in that house. There was no way any woman would want to marry him, and hardly anyone from the town ever checked on him, if it wasn't for an appointment. He got pretty much ostracized by them, and I'm sure he knew it as well. How could he not, after all? What we don't know is how he felt about it. I believe that Nicholas didn't much care about their opinion, but their complete rejection of him on a human level must have stung. Which is why he started his side project. Penny could feel a chill in the air as she watched her friend's smile turn conspiratorial. On days when he had no patience, Dr. Nicholas Kaster began roaming the countryside, dressed in his dentist's outfit. He was looking for people, vagrants and the like, who needed his help. If he found someone, he would accompany them back to this house behind me, give them food, and then treat them. The entries in his records pertaining to those people are a bit different as well. There are no names in there, only rough estimates of their age and sometimes their gender. Something else that stuck out to me when I read through the reports was that the doctors seemed to be less concerned with those people's health than normal. Some of the entries speak of accidents, and more blood being spilled than usual. Others feel almost like entries of a diary, where he complains about them. And he felt a shiver running through her bones. Yeah, Ava was really getting in the groove now. She was smiling brightly, but kept stealing glances from side to side. I don't think the doctor helped them out of any sense of goodwill. He almost seemed disgusted by some of them. I don't even think he did it to ingratiate himself with the townsfolk, who all pretty much looked down on vagrants and the like. If you ask me, I think the doctor started treating them out of boredom. There wasn't much else he could do around town, and the only thing that still made his life feel like it had meaning was his business. So, he went out and looked along the roads for willing subjects to perform on. And yeah, he treated them well. At least at first. Ava had this smile on her face that told Penny how much she enjoyed building up to the really gruesome part. We don't know how it happened, but on a day in March, the doctor lost his first patient. It doesn't mean that other people hadn't died from his procedures, far from it. But this one stopped breathing while he was still operating on them. We only have initials, KK, and and a rough description of the man. Early 40s, dark hair, dirty clothing. Found walking down the road between the city north and the one east. The man complained about a sore molar, and the doctor took him home. He gave him the ether rag, and the man seemed to settle just fine. But as Nicholas took a closer look, he found the whole area around the tooth already swelling. Spontaneously, he decided it would be best to remove some of the inflamed skin to get a better purchase on the molar, and started cutting into the sore flesh, which elicited a slight groan from the patient. He tried working at his normal pace, but found it hard on that day for some reason. In his records, he complained about the stench coming from the man and how the patient had a tendency to not keep his mouth fully open, even with the anesthesia. Dr. Kaster put the ether rag over the man's mouth and nose again to keep him sedated, then pulled the tooth out with the big pliers, only to find his patient starting to shake. According to the record, there was blood gushing from the man's jaw, mixed with pus. The doctor tried to keep his airways open, but the guy died anyway. There was nothing he could have done, he wrote into the entry.
Jesus fucking Christ, Eva. What the fuck? So he accidentally killed a man.
Penny could see her friend's knowing smile. Oh, yeah. But killing a vagrant back then was, sadly, no big deal at all. It wasn't like anyone would be coming after him. And Dr. Kaster even went and talked to the authorities, who told him not to worry too much. The man's body was dumped into one of the pauper graves, and nothing much happened further. I don't think even the townsfolk gave him shit for it. They didn't see it as him having killed someone, but as just a tragic accident, while he had tried to do good. Penny was shaking her head in disgust. Well, the doctor himself felt different about it. You can see it from then on in his records. I think something inside of him broke that day. Maybe he had shattered his own self-image as the perfect doctor. Maybe it was the amount of blood he had seen. It could also be that he had killed the man on purpose and had found he liked it. From then on, his records turned strange. He extracted 7 teeth from the next vagrant and then alerted the authorities. 1 week after that, another patient of his died. 2 days later, there was an article in the newspaper about a brawl between the doctor and the barkeeper. I think he started losing his mind. Penny looked away from her friend and toward the house she was standing in front of. With the sun setting, this place suddenly felt far more alive. She could see the weathered roof, half collapsed, the completely overgrown lawn, and the bushes that hadn't been cut back in decades. It was abandoned. And yet, she could clearly feel something from there. Someone watching them. One would imagine that such mental breakdowns would quickly draw the eyes of the people around him. But Dr. Nicholas Kaster didn't get any repercussions. Apparently, his behavior toward patients from this town got better. He wore masks with them, so they couldn't see his manic grin, and from what I can gather, stopped flying into rages at the first opportunity. The people around town were probably relieved that they still had their own dentist. And now it even seemed like the guy could be reasonably professional, even outside his business. Still, it wasn't like they started inviting him to all the festivities. But I found an old report about some Thanksgiving-type celebration where they mentioned that the doctor was in attendance. People started actually comparing him to his late father, who was truly beloved. It must have looked to them like the man had turned his life around, I think. But the only thing he had changed was his outlet. In his records, we can see the true monster that was born the day the first patient of his died. While he kept playing nice with the townsfolk, he ramped up his extracurricular activities outside of town. At least twice a week he got someone from the roads to follow him, promising them pain relief and free treatments, only to knock them out with ether, and then pull out almost a dozen teeth, or cut deep into their gums. His records are completely insane. He talks about muffled screams even while they were anesthetized, about the blood gushing from their gums, and sometimes about how he put a hand over their mouth to make them swallow until they choked. Penny could feel her stomach lurching.
That's fucking disgusting, Eva.
She blurted out and watched as her friend gave her that wicked smile again. For years it went on like that. The doctor in his house treated patients of the towns around him with care, then let out his inner demons on vagrants and drifters. It is said he kept a big jar full of pulled-out healthy teeth somewhere in his office, shaking it at night. At least, that's what some of the people in town later told the newspaper. Then one day, it simply stopped. I'm pretty sure the authorities had gotten wind of his proclivities. And the doctor must have realized it as well, because the day the police stormed his house, he was nowhere to be found. They looked everywhere, but found no trace of him. Only the chair, his tools, and the big canister containing ether, which was still half full. Police turned the house upside down, then asked around the town, but the last person to see him had done so the evening before, outside the home in his garden. They looked there too, and found over a dozen shallow graves filled with bodies. Vagrants, they claimed, but I'm not so sure. Apparently, after the third corpse was found, they simply stopped and declared the lot a public health hazard. No one ever saw Dr. Nicholas Kaster again. At least not officially. There were reports of people in town looking at his house years later and seeing a figure walking by a window, or hearing the rattling of teeth when they stood out here, where we are right now. No one has ever bought the lot, because it is not for sale. The people of this town made sure that it would never again be owned by anyone, and stay as a reminder for the rest of time. Penny looked at the house and could feel it once more, this strange sensation of being watched. Just last year, a young man and a woman, probably spurred on by too many true crime stories, came here to look for the doctor. They hopped the fence behind me, walked through the overgrown lawn, and entered the house. I have the woman's report here with me. They forced open the front door, which wasn't too hard, and climbed into the ruins. According to her, the place looked exactly as eerie as one would suspect, and the holes in the walls turned the blowing of the wind into whistling sounds. As if the doctor was still walking among the ruins. The woman claims she could hear footsteps off in a distance, and as they finally found the door leading down to the basement, she felt a presence downstairs. It looked at her, she said, and she wanted to leave, but her partner convinced her to stay and film. According to her, that was the worst decision of her life. They descended those stairs, her with the phone in hand, filming it all, when they started to smell it. A sweet odor, almost like cotton, she said. It didn't smell like anything she had ever come across before. But the woman didn't have any time to wonder. Her partner, walking in front of her, suddenly collapsed and fell down the stairs. And before she could run after him, she felt herself falling unconscious as well. Penny looked closely at her friend. She wanted to know if that story was true or not. But Ava didn't look like she was playing a trick on her at all. What they smelled was the odor of ether, you see. There is something still in there, walking around the empty halls, waiting for people to come in. The woman came to sitting in a chair, strapped to it with thick leather belts, while in the almost darkness, she could see someone standing above her. She swears she heard him chuckling, and for a moment could see this manic grin as a rough hand opened her mouth. The ether was still making her drowsy as she tried to fight against her restraints. But the one standing above didn't hesitate at all. Cold metal pliers got pushed into her mouth, and she could hear the sound of its tips touching her molar. She tried to scream, and the thing above her chuckled. Before, with a single pull, he ripped out her tooth and dropped it into a metal bowl. The woman claims that she could see a face more clearly then, as the blood started gushing over her tongue. It was grinning from ear to ear, smacking its lips. He pulled 4 more of her teeth, then put a rag over her mouth and forced her to inhale. She claims she heard her partner scream after that, but in her completely dazed state, she couldn't even tell from where. The doctor was chuckling along with him, but when she woke up, she found herself lying outside, here, where I stand, completely alone, but with 5 teeth missing and a mouth still full of blood.
What the fuck, Eva? That can't be true.
Penny saw her friend shoot her a glance devoid of any humor. It is. The woman went to the police station 1 town over and told them what had happened. But as soon as she said the street's name out loud, the officers lost all interest. They told her they wouldn't go there with her and started treating it all as a joke. I'm sure they know exactly what has happened here. But no one around these parts wants to have anything to do with the home of the doctor. They just pretend it's all jokes and pranks and keep the peace by staying away from the house. The woman's partner was never seen again, by the way. But if you look behind me, right between the two bushes furthest to the left. You can see that the ground there has been disturbed. Penny took a step to the side and looked in the direction Ava had told her. There really was a slight mound between two shrubs. A shiver ran through her body. The doctor is still in there, in his home. Maybe he never escaped, but hid somewhere in the basement and died years later. Maybe some of the townspeople knew about it, but kept their mouths shut as long as he would continue to treat them. Whatever it is, some part of him has remained and is waiting in there. And whoever comes here, if they are from out of town, they will get the same treatment those vagrants used to get. Dosed with ether and then dragged into the basement, where he will do his work. So, want to take a look inside? Penny stared at her friend a moment longer, then focused on the house. The sun was almost gone, and the shadows seemed alive in there. She could feel someone watching them, and as the wind shifted and another breeze picked up, she thought she could smell this sweet, cottony stench.
I think that's enough for today, Ava.
She quickly said, and felt relief as her friend grabbed her by the arm and led her away from the home of the doctor.